the lowest vote getter and reallocates that candidate's second choice votes to their second choices, and then that process continues until one candidate gets a majority of the votes and crosses a threshold of 50%.
And it's being used tomorrow in Arlington so you open up the Washington Post on Sunday, you'll read about the probably on page 1 of the Metro section about the use of ranked choice voting, instant runoff voting where the Democrats are using it at a firehouse primary with probably 2,000 or 3,000 people to pick the very likely winner of a special election for the countywide office. There's some very hopeful signs of it expanding to more jurisdictions. Maybe just say a minute about the use of it in Minneapolis and what you felt it meant last year. Because there's about a dozen cities that use it in this country. Internationally, it's much more used. But it had a really interesting impact on Minneapolis.
Yeah, so Minneapolis adopted it in 2006 and then used it in 2009. We had a very popular incumbent mayor and not very many competitive city council races. In 2013, we had an open mayor's race and 6 open city council seats. And 3 or 4 of those city council seats, there were 3 or more candidates. So the ranked choice voting process was very important on a lot of these races. And what we saw was just a completely different campaign season than I've ever seen in my life. It was civil, which no one has ever expected. It was very much issue-based. If it would have just come down to 2 candidates with our primary system, where we usually, highest percentage turnout in primaries in Minneapolis is 10%, I believe, so that's just a tiny little portion of our population making a huge decision for the city. So when it came down, we had a very long ballot. We had a lot of candidates. We had some very serious campaigns and a lot of different voices being heard. Eventually, we elected a mayor who initially came in with 35%, and every time we eliminated a candidate, her percentage just grew and grew and grew, and eventually she passed that threshold. And the other frontrunner didn't ask anybody for second choice votes, didn't ask anybody for third choice votes, really just campaigned to his base and came in with 25 and just stayed at 25. So because she had to reach that threshold, our new mayor, Betsy Hodges, really had to go to a broad coalition of voters and really look beyond her base, which is in one very particular area of the city, and go to communities that aren't heard as much and really listen to people, and therefore she's held accountable to those. And another huge thing that I think is really awesome about this system, our elected mayor spent $0 on television ads. It was 100% grassroots organizing and campaigning. She was knocking on doors, she was making phone calls, she was present at every single city event. So it really changed this process, and now the city's thrilled to have a mayor that they've all decided that they maybe they don't all love, but they like or can live with because they have those 3 choices.
So my name is Cynthia, and when I first started in the sort of movement for election reform, we didn't call it ranked choice voting, we called it preferential voting. And sometimes the single-member version, instant runoff voting, the multi-member version, when you're electing, say, 3 seats at one time or 10 seats at one time, is the single transferable vote, which has an unfortunate acronym of STV. So sometimes you gotta own it, So when I ran, I think 23 referendum campaigns, or been involved with 23 referendum campaigns for STV throughout the world, and probably one of my favorites is we just went and made a bunch of T-shirts and it said "Got STV." Right? There was an unpopular mayor in Auckland in New Zealand, and so we wrote "Give John Banks STV." We went onto college campuses and we made sort of extra wrappers, I like origami, around condoms, and it said STV. Not a disease with a cure, and then you open it up and there's stuff inside. And I'm mentioning some of these things because, for some reason, some people think STV isn't sexy, but voting reform really is. And the topic of this was action ideas and tools, and so I just wanted to kind of share some of those. And we talked a little bit in the lunch meeting about mock elections. It was a topic that came up earlier. I'm a big fan of mock elections. I think what happens whenever you're trying to change something, the hurdle to change something is so huge because all the no side has to do is come up with one thing, and all of a sudden people are better the devil you know. There's a status quo. You got to move them beyond inertia. You got to move them beyond fear. And a lot of times when it's something new, people are like, "Oh my God, it's so complicated." We used to use a line IRV easy as 1, 2, 3, and then some people are like, "Oh no, don't use that one." I love it. We used it in Oakland. I thought it was great. I think the way you get around that is you get people using IRV mock elections. So we held mock elections for ruler of the universe. So it was Princess Leia, Chewbacca, Han Solo, and Darth Vader. We went to a local costume store, we got a little Darth Vader mask for one of the guys, we had one of the females with longer hair, put their hair in braids, maybe wear a sheet. You know, next thing you know, people are stopping by because they're like, what's going on? You explain it to them, you hand them a ballot, they fill it out, wow, IRB, easy as 1, 2, 3. They get it on a gut level, which sometimes when we're talking policy reform, it's kind of on a wonky level. I mean, I sat here earlier and there was some discussion, I thought, wow, we're all a bunch of nerdy little wonks. I mean, some of the stuff that's been coming out of our mouth. But at the end of the day, when you're doing voting reform, you're reaching out to a wide range of people. It's not just the folks who are in the League of Women Voters who are amazing allies on this issue, but it's a wide range of people. It's young people, it's old people, it's people who may not speak the best English in the world. I live in Queens, 47% of Queens is foreign born. You've got to break it down and make it easy for people, make it accessible for people. So I think there's enormous opportunity for us to do things like mock elections, for us to do things like play with the acronym STV. I think there's also enormous opportunity for college campuses to try to change their student government so that they're elected using IRB. Because then those students, they're used to using IRB. So when it comes up in their local municipality later on in life, it's nothing new to them. So I just think that there's a lot of ways that many of the topics that we talked about today can all be intertwined. My big thing is always think about how to get rid of that fear of the unknown, and that's by making it fun and making it accessible.
Maybe just if you could add just a little bit about just the basics of what a winner-take-all versus non-winner-take-all is.
So,
your campaign pitch.
So with the idea of proportional representation is that people are elected in proportion to the level of support. So 10% of the vote, 10% of the seats. There's lots of different systems out there. I mentioned single transferable vote. There's also mixed member proportional, which is called an MMP. There's cumulative voting. There's lots of different voting systems. I think Paula was talking with the other women from the League of Women Voters about when they do studies, sometimes you want to come up with this whole laundry list of different voting systems. And even with the Voting Rights Act, there's been different results of using Voting Rights Act, so that's not, some cases it's been cumulative voting that's been put in a jurisdiction in order to address the idea of making sure there's more diverse representation. So the ultimate idea is diverse representation. Diverse viewpoints around the legislative table making better public policy. So in a single seat, like with instant runoff voting, the threshold is 50% plus 1. Because 2 people can get 50%, but only 1 person can get 50% plus 1. So if you're in a 4-person seat, then your threshold is 20% plus 1. And that's because 5 people can get 20%, but only 4 people can get 20% plus 1. So you're setting up a minimum threshold for people to get elected. And that also changes the dynamics of campaigning because maybe you're not going after 51% of the vote or a plurality of 37% of the vote. And so maybe you can appeal to your base, but that's because we're trying to have this diversity across the spectrum get elected. So this issue of districting, someone talked about gerrymandering earlier, districting becomes a big issue because if it's a 4-member seat, your threshold is 20%, but if it's a 9-member seat, like in many city councils, your threshold is 10%. And all of a sudden, maybe you don't need to spend as much money because you don't need to reach every voter, you just need to reach your 10% base. And so I'm a big fan because I think if we change into these different models, that it has an impact on everything else. More cooperative campaigning about issues, but also it can really have an impact on the amount of money you actually need to get elected as well. So it may not be overturning Citizens United, but it may be making money a little bit less relevant because you don't need to reach the same number of people.
Now, I'll just add very quickly that we've done this report, Devin is the lead author of it, did a lot of work with Andrew, at fairvoting.us. It's really worth a quick check, a long review, which is about Congress, about House Representatives, and about, one, we have this incredible partisan skew in the current system, in almost very few races that matter, a lot of racial skews based on the area. If we went to STV, ranked choice voting, in districts where you would go from, say, a state that has 9 districts to 3, each of which with 3 members. Some change like that, which can be done by statute for Congress, just an act of Congress like DC statehood. If we did districts of 3, 4, or 5 across the country, every single district would be one that more than one party won in. So both major parties would have the voters the voting power to be able to elect a member. You would see the party that won more than one would very likely have different wings of its party. You'd have sort of more breadth within the party. As far as voting rights, from North Carolina all the way to the Texas border, every single African American voter would be in a position to elect a candidate of choice, and every single white voter would be in a position to help elect a candidate of choice. You would see just a very different dynamic, and that can be done by statute. And if we really want to end gerrymandering, that lays out a case, but it shows it in a very visual way and a lot of great analysis. So, and it does other things, which maybe our next speaker can address.
Yes, what a lucky position to be in the last spot. My name is Cynthia Terrell, and I work at FairVote now, but I come from a background of working on campaigns and elections and running some issue campaigns, like an Equal Rights Amendment campaign in Iowa, which was an exciting race, an exciting time to be working in Iowa in 1992. And at FairVote, we have always sought ways to publicize the need for more women in office. And I think, like many people, we were poised in the 90s after this much touted year of the woman that came and passed without much change. We were poised for a real increase in the percentages of women serving in elected office. There are certainly great groups that have focused their entire mission on electing women, and they've made a great contribution to it. But where we find ourselves now in 2014 is 98th in the world in terms of the percentage of women in office. And some of us at FairVote began to think about this last year, particularly in the context of the centennial of suffrage, which is coming up. In what year, everybody?
2020.
2020, that's right. A lot of our things are focused on that amazing year where everything is going to change. So in preparation for that, we began to talk about what kinds of things that we could do to draw attention to the poor representation of women in this country. And we realized that pulling together some of the data on what's going on out there would be a good idea. So we put together a report. The woman who really edited it and wrote most of it couldn't be here because her grandfather died, but she, Andrea Levian, did a fabulous job pulling it together. And in it, we discussed 6 things that we think are key things that need to be looked at in order to get more women elected. And the first 3 of those 6 are things that other groups are already doing a great job doing. So we wanted to highlight them, but we're not going to spend any time doing them aside from saying these groups are doing them, and we did that in our report. So one of them is the role of women in the media, stereotypes, the way women are presented and represented and so forth, and the double standard Wendy Davis is held to, for example. The other is the recruiting and training and supporting angle of it, which great work is being done at the state level, at the national level, by both parties. There's certainly an edge for Democratic women in terms of spending on this, but both parties are trying on that front. And then the third thing that other groups are doing a good job at is finding women to run for executive offices and really pushing them into those positions. But we identified 3 things that it seems as though there's not work being done on, and we'd like to hear it if you know of it. But the 3 things that we really are taking on, as it were, in an organized way, are looking at the party rules, what parties can be doing at the local level to find candidates, to recruit candidates, and what local people can do to put pressure on local parties to say, hey, what's it going to be? Are you going to do 50-50, or who are you looking for? Can we help you find women candidates? So party rules is one thing. The reason that we're interested in that is that these countries, which are doing so much better than we are in terms of women's representation, have employed a whole bunch of innovative ways to get their parties to provide incentives to recruit more women and run more women. The second thing are legislative practices, what's going on in the actual legislative bodies, either the city council or the state legislature or at the federal level, that help women and parents actually serve effectively. When are the committee meetings held? How far do people have to travel? Are there bathrooms available for women to use? Which even in our glorious state of Maryland, I think Jamie Raskin, I seem to remember him saying, the extra bathroom in the Senate office building was only added 2 or 3 years ago, or something like that, for women. So there are legislative practices that impact how women how well they can do in terms of serving and attaining leadership positions. And then the third thing are these voting systems, which are probably the single most common denominator in all of these countries' experiences with increasing representation of women. And it's the same reason that people of color and ideological minorities and others do well. It's just that women happen to be in these parties, so it works even better for them because we're an actual majority as opposed to other constituencies which are not. So the use of multi-seat districts with fair representation voting, ranked choice voting, these systems favor women's success electorally very clearly. And so those are the three things that we are really going to focus on. And in terms of what people can do in their own communities, we've thought of encouraging people to do an audit at their local or state level in terms of how many people are serving, what are legislative practices that are happening that may be beneficial, that could be shared and that other states could be pushing for in their area, and then what are some of the party rules that are being employed, again, at the local level. So doing an audit of what's going on, and then we hope to provide a forum for sharing that information. So on the website, in future reports that we'll be doing, in this kind of a meeting in various parts of the country, but with a focus on women's representation, we'll share that information. So doing an audit in your community, and then setting up task forces, much like Patty is contributing to in the promoter vote work locally in Montgomery County and Tacoma Park, having a task force on women's representation that looks at what's going on and gets some legitimacy from the state and local governments, and really identifies what can be done and how to take action on some of these things. So that's what I will leave you with.
So, quick question. This is like pretending that IRB, but it pertains to OA. Since we had it in North Carolina, it's not just a North Carolina thing. In places where people of color running for office, they were so used to not being able to get elected and protecting the single shot, that even though we would try to explain to people not the single shot, when these were intelligent people campaigning these people over on the judicial race, they would fight us and still say on that judicial race, tell the person to go and write the candidate's name in all 4 spots. And it does not give them any edge. But I was wondering, did you find a way that you can make, especially minority communities that are so hooked on single shot, understand that this is better than doing that?
In my experience, I actually didn't see that so much. That was the initial idea, and that fear came into play a lot. And this idea of loyalty was really a big thing that I had to work around. But the way I always phrased it was that any choice beyond your first is only a backup. And once you use the word backup, people understood that. But when you're saying like 1, 2, 3 things like that, people aren't quite sure until you very clearly explain that a second, third, fourth choice, etc., doesn't water down your first. So I mean, I think once you could get people in the mindset that this is only a contingency plan, they had no problem with it.
It's interesting. It's a common tactic in the South, the single shot voting, which isn't necessarily done elsewhere. So I think that might have been a special dynamic. But there is a long history of people of color and low-income people and just a range of people being able to use the ranked choice ballot. But they do have to make that basic grasp that the second choice doesn't kind of get your first choice. But then it becomes very liberating. Just tell a quick story from when Cincinnati used it for 30 years. And when they're first, in the mid-20s, Cincinnati, the African-American population was only about 8%. And it was a 9-seat election where it took about 10% to win. And neither of the sort of the major political forces would run a black candidate. So the black community ran someone as an independent, and but they did explicitly say let's withhold preferences, let's single shot on purpose. So they could have said second or third, but they didn't. And then the candidate did quite well, and then one of the major parties said, ooh, we better get that person on our team next time because we don't want those votes going to waste. And so they actually got an African-American elected in the Cincinnati City Council when they were only 10% back in the 20s. And ultimately, there were 2 African-Americans when there were still only about 18% black. And both parties started to compete for the black vote because they were using that strategically. So that, but anyway, it is a liberating, this ranked choice ballot does sort of allow you to, say who you really like, but also, accept that second choice, and then that ultimately makes people compete for those votes who, bring people in.
One of the things that would come up a lot, I'm going to take your question, kind of like the guy who's a lawyer to answer a slightly different question, is that a lot of times, especially in districts that maybe traditionally were black, and then also now there's a Latino population, or whatever it might be, is that what was happening is that candidates were being told by the party not to run, so you don't want to split the vote. So instead, what a ranked choice ballot allows is for those candidates to run without fear of splitting the vote. So when I was talking to different communities when I was helping run the Oakland IRB campaign, this was actually something people really liked. Because again and again and again, I can't remember now because it's been several years, but there were campaign after campaign after campaign where everyone knew that such and such wanted to run, but was forced not to run by the party because of fear of vote splitting, or this fear of pitting different minority communities against each other. So that's usually the angle that I talk about quite a bit. And then, like I said, I just do a lot of mock elections, and I find that when people actually fill out the ballot, that it helps them understand it a little bit.
Yeah, I'm really interested in trying to bring ranked choice voting to my own community, both the single member version and the multi-member version. So maybe a question for you, Lynn, and anyone else, Grace, anyone else who wants to chime in. I'm just wondering, one thing that I found very difficult in trying to build support for it is that it's a complicated idea to wrap your head around, especially the multi-member version, STV, because you've got votes transferring and people getting crossed up the top and up the bottom, and people are just like, I don't have time to think about this. I just want to cast my vote. So have you come up with a really good way, a simple way of explaining it to people so they can kind of digest it and go, aha, this is the answer?
I mean, I have a few that I tried out at various times. I think it's more to get people into the mindset that this isn't anything you haven't used before. I mean, this is a way we think all the time, and I mean, it's a silly kind of gimmick that we use to describe it, but we did kind of an ice cream example just because it's a very easy thing. But let's say you went to an ice cream store and you wanted a certain flavor and they didn't have it. Do you leave? Do you storm out? Do you burn it down? What do? You pick another flavor. And so either way you're getting ice cream, but at least in this sense you're in the conversation longer and you get something. So I mean, it's more ways of translating that to people so that it's actually not this scary thing you've never done before. It's nothing crazy. It's just a longer conversation when eventually you're giving someone a job to represent you. So you might as well look at these people more, and if you can have your favorite, you might as well vet these other candidates to see who you would take instead.
I also think that as policy people, we kind of want to be like, okay, so single transferable vote, this is how it works. So you actually transfer fractions of each vote. and if you're just trying to get, Joe, who's like, you're talking to outside of the ice cream shop that you burned down, like, you don't have to go into all of those details to say the basics of, this is how it works, this is the result that you're going to get. And I think that being on point with messaging is very important for anything.
Yes,
in
telling
life.
stories.
And I mean, the single woman version, internet voting, is certainly much easier to do. I often say to people, hey, have you ever seen American Idol? You start out with like 10 people, and then the next week it's 9, and then it's 8, and it's 7. It's basically round by round by round. What instant runoff voting is doing is just doing it all at once. And so they kind of get that because everyone's seen American Idol, etc. I used to have this gimmick when I was doing STV though, and it's been a while, so I haven't done it. And but I would basically have a bunch of coins in my pocket that would add up to $1. Because the idea with fractional transfers is that ultimately your vote is going to be one whole vote. That you might be, 20 cents of it's here, and 30 cents of it's there, and 50 cents of it's there. So I kind of use this visual of tossing a bunch of coins on the table to use it when I was at that point in a presentation. But really, it's about preferential voting. It's about ranked choice voting. It's about how easy it is And so one thing I will say is that I would ban the use of the word complicated or complex from any use during campaign. Because even our own supporters would be like, well, it's kind of complicated. I'd be like, no. It's not. So it's just even yourself, and because we have a tendency to internalize it. It's just you got to get that out of your brain.
You know, one thing, if you put like 100 people in a room, and you said there were like 3 ice cream flavors around the room, and then you said, okay, we want everyone to stand behind their favorite ice cream flavor, but at the end of the day, we also want one, but you have to settle so there's 1/3 behind each one. The algorithm, what they would do to figure that out would be exactly what STD is. So it's the end of the day, you know, everyone would be standing behind it, and most people behind their first choice, but some people would have to settle on their second choice, and it's just like that's actually what the system does. So there is a basic reality to it that we need to figure out a way to communicate. But it's, you know, at the end of the day, everyone gets
So
what they want.
this concept of fairness, I mean, when you're talking about a proportional model, it's all about fairness. And everyone loves fairness. We have FairVote when it used to be Center for Voting Democracy. You know, we saw some great examples earlier today about the use of the internet and video in particular. And so really, I mean, I know over the years various groups have put together videos on this topic. I think we're all kind of waiting for the definitive one that's going to have a hint of satire, a hint of humor, be compelling, you know, and that's certainly a challenge. But in this day and age of social media, I think that a decent video could really make a huge difference in people understanding the proportional model.
Actually, I'm a big fan of it's your run because it avoids the spoiler. But when you say to the criticism that it actually gives voice to some representatives that disputes can be very, like for example, you know, with Mussolini's old party, they had this different party.
Could you talk a little louder?
Or repeat the question.
Mussolini's.
Use the.
Hold on.
Just push.
Does it work? Cool. So, the criticism that I have, I mean, I'm a big fan of IRD because it avoids the spoiler effect. But giving, like, when you have multi-member proportional districts, you can give some pretty hateful parties a seat at the conversation table, like in Italy, for example. They've had proportional representation since the end of the war, and no Italian government has lasted more than 19 months. Or Mussolini's old party, his granddaughter, I think, still has a seat in parliament because of the system. I come from Kenya, where we used to have first past the post, and the president would win by 34% of the vote. They moved to a plurality system, but the question still remains: who do these people represent? Because the people who are fronting the candidates are the parties, and the parties only represent a tiny elite interest. So my question is, I don't think IRV or STD actually solves that problem, because in the end, if it's the parties just that are choosing the candidates, they can just look out for their own self-interest in the end. I mean, that's been my experience with it, but.
It seems like there's two different questions you just asked there. So the first one is yes. I mean, you hear, oh, there's Israel, there's like 50 different parties, and they can't get anything done. I mean, there they set their threshold like 2%. You know, when you're looking at changing a system and you're deciding what the threshold is, you have to think about, you know, what's going to make sense in your community. But the other one is that, you know, it's about democracy. It is about fair representation. And you know what? If 10% of the voters have incredibly right-wing positions, and there's a candidate who's speaking to them, then that's the ideal of democracy. It's easy to say that, though. I mean, the number of times I've sat in a room with progressive organizations who then don't seem to understand that we can't design a voting system so that only their candidates will get elected. And fair. I mean,
We call it single-member districts, that's.
Right. So, you know, and so it does pop up. I mean, now on the second thing about the parties, I want to go into this one a little bit because this issue in a lot of countries where they have a party list system, the parties put rules in place that usually have a certain amount of like gender requirements. So they'll say there needs to be like 50% of women, you know, in the first 20 seats, or they need to have geographic distribution, or they need to have ethnic distribution. I mean, in New Zealand, where I spent 2 years working for Parliament, you know, those are some of the things that the Greens did. Is they required, so the parties do this because that's how they get votes. When you're talking about the self-interest of the party, at the end of the day, the party needs to make sure that they get those votes so that people get in. So it's about self-interest, but when it's a party list system, it's about appealing to as many people as possible so you can get as big a party vote. So those are kind of different questions and different answers. But go ahead.
Well, I'm just going to sort of flag this handout that the Democracy North Carolina team did, which is that they have the scorecards. But if you look at the scorecards, there's a dramatic fact, which is that there's a whole lot of people with 0, and then a lot of people with like 80 to 100, and then like hardly anyone in between. And if you look at our system right now, and you can measure it in different ways, but multi-seat districts going to 3, 4, or 5 seats, really the constituency that would very likely do particularly well is those candidates that might actually be in the middle and be agents of compromise. And not everyone would love them because they're not the hundreds and they're not the zeros, but they're in fact reflective of a whole lot of people that right now are actually not being represented. So that particularly the kind of STV that we're talking about, 3, 4, 5 seats, it allows all the full spectrum to run and have a real better crack at winning. But they may not win, but their votes will be competed for. But probably on the representation side, this sort of left, center, right, which I think for the South, say, and for a lot of other parts of the country, would be in fact very healthy to have a less polarized, just one side or the other kind of politics. Because when you lose, you really lose, and that shouldn't happen. It shouldn't be this kind of incredible swing that we just experienced in North Carolina that can happen with that kind of system. And it's candidate-based, which is what Lynn's point was. The parties, in fact, can't control the outcome.
Probably move to the reception soon, so people can get to dinner and we can talk more.
Yes.
Yeah.
So thank you all for coming. I want to say something quick. Just super quick. So one is I wanted to thank Patricia, the full staff, but I also wanted to thank, so thank you all, Race, who brought the stuff here, Jen, and all the people who helped do it. But also, we have 2 lovely French interns who have been working with us for several months, and one of them is her last day. So thank you, Angel. Yeah, the first woman president. Good job there. Thank you.
I just don't talk about how this is my fun. I'm here to take care of it. I focus on so I'll show you there, Californians.
Oh, eventually, yeah. But just the county right now, we have some at-large elections. They're already at large. They're the worst system. We must make the best.
Oh yeah, a lot of